What's up, everybody? Welcome back to The Pulse. On today's episode, we visit a conversation between Parker and Indigo Hynds about Autism in the Spider-Verse. The pair discuss potential traits of many Spider-Man characteristics, versions, and the history of Spider-Man's development. So, is Spider-Man autistic? Let's dive in and find out.
Okay, so Indigo, do you think the writers of any of the Spider-Man media intentionally wrote the character as autistic?
I don't think any of them did intentionally write the character as autistic, since the character of Peter Parker was created in the 60s. I think back then people had a really limited idea of how autism can present. And since then, I think writers have been working with the same archetype that they always have to create Peter Parker. It's it's a very autistic coded archetype that's like the awkward white boy savant archetype. It's a trope that's in quite a lot of things. And I think at this point, lots of people, even neurotypical people, can recognize that as a pretty autistic coded character archetype. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are so many iterations of Spider-Man now, though, and like so many different writers, especially when you're talking about the comics, because it's been running for a very, very long time, and there's very, very many spider people at this point. I do think it's not inconceivable that a comic writer could be writing a spider person to be intentionally autistic, but if they haven't made it explicit in the text. Although there is a canonically disabled spider person who is queer and has EDS, and I find it very, very likely that there were autistic people involved in the creation of her character, especially since originally she was fan-made and then became an official part of the Spider-Verse later.
If not intentionally, do you think they wrote with specific traits that we now know are autistic characteristics?
Absolutely. There are different autistic traits that I think present differently in different spider people, and some traits that I think are universal to all of them. Some of them I think have their own different traits that I think are more unique to them, and there are some that are just kind of universal. I feel like there are some that you kind of just need to be a spider person. All of them have some degree of social awkwardness, special interests, also sensory stuff, but that's kind of involved in the superpowers, so I don't like go into that too much. And also a very strong sense of justice. And what I mean by that last point is that they have very strong beliefs, something that's present in most superheroes, hence the reason they become superheroes. But spider people especially are very rigid about these beliefs. Spider-Man is the only Avenger that doesn't kill anyone, at least not humans. He did in the MCU, he killed aliens in Endgame, but like
aliens are aliens. They're the bad guys, but they're not.
Yeah, and I was
human.
unsure if those ones that he did kill were actually sentient or not. It was not actually super clear with those ones.
Non-sentient aliens.
Yeah, and he's very firm about his rule that he doesn't kill anyone, like in pretty much all of the media that Spider-Man is in. He operates on a different set of morals than most other superheroes, when it would be a lot easier for him to conform to the ways that everyone else is doing everything, especially in the MCU, when there's like
Everyone's killing everybody.
He's in a universe with lots and lots of superheroes, and there's this big organization of them, you know. But yeah, also I find it interesting that the only other mainstream Marvel superhero that I can think of with that rule is Daredevil, who is also very, very autistic coded, in my opinion.
Do you think any of the actors intentionally play the character as autistic? If not, why do you think they come off as autistic?
I don't think any of the actors intentionally play the character as autistic, but I do think they all come off as autistic. And I'm just talking about live action, like Peter Parker here, because I don't think that there's a way to play Peter Parker in a way that's true to his character at all without playing him as autistic, even if it's unintentional. And each actor does play the character a little bit differently, but I think each actor has a different way that, even if it's entirely unintentional, that they are displaying Peter Parker's autistic traits. I think you can see a bit more of a stereotypical presentation of autism when you're looking at Tom Holland's movies or Tobey Maguire's movies. And with Andrew Garfield, I think he still comes off as very autistic to me. It's just in a bit of a different way. It's in a bit of more of a theater kid way. Yeah.
Do you think that the wider audience is aware of some traits and they find them endearing or annoying because they remind them of someone they know who is autistic?
I think the audience probably finds most of his autistic traits endearing, since Spider-Man has been a well-loved character for decades and has never really presented any less autistic than the iterations of him do now. I do think that if the writers started to write him intentionally as autistic, then there's a good chance that people would start to find his traits more annoying. I think because sometimes when a character is autistic coded but not intentionally written as autistic, they're given autistic traits that are either societally seen as a good thing, such as the savant trope or just a strong set of beliefs, or traits that are seen as endearing or at least more palatable for a largely neurotypical audience, such as social awkwardness.
Do you think an audience appreciates seeing an autistic character on screen but wouldn't be friends with them in real life?
I do. I think people like to watch characters that are different and go against social norms, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what they want in their lives. They just like the idea of it. It's kind of like when Stranger Things 4 came out and everyone was obsessed with Eddie Munson, and a lot of people pointed out that these people obsessed with his character would have absolutely bullied him in real life.
Yeah, or I've also heard Wednesday in Wednesday.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
same thing applies with that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. As an autistic person, do you appreciate the friends that the Spider-Man character has? And do you think any of those friends are also autistic?
Yes. Especially if we're talking about the MCU specifically, then I absolutely believe that both of his friends, like his main friends, Ned and MJ, are autistic. And I do have kind of different reasons for each of them. Let's see. Ned Leeds specifically, it's pretty obvious, really. His autistic traits are like not actually that subtle. It's more so that they're played off as a joke every time. Like a lot of his character is just comedic relief, but all of the comedic relief that he does is literally just him being autistic, even if it's not framed that way. Michelle Jones, a little bit of a different vibe with that one, but she is best friends with two autistic people.
Yeah.
She's got the strong sense of justice she doesn't do things against her morals. And like that does isolate her from people sometimes. Like she is really firm about that. In Spider-Man Homecoming, you see that she like doesn't go well, she goes on the field trip. She doesn't go to the Washington Monument because it was built by slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, she's just like very, very convicted in her beliefs. She also has a fairly flat affect and monotone voice most of the time. And she's not very good at social situations, really. And she claimed herself that she didn't have any friends prior to becoming friends with Peter and Ned.
Is there anything else you want to add?
I could talk about other spider people being
Sure.
autistic. Okay. I just don't have a question to go off of. So
Yeah.
I've covered a lot of Peter Parker from the MCU and like quite a few Peter Parkers. I am down to talk a little bit about the Spider-Verse.
Yes. Yes, talk about the Spider-Verse.
Okay. I think a lot of people can get on board with the idea of Peter Parker being autistic fairly easily because he does fit the trope of the, autistic white boy savant science-y vibe.
Yep.
And people, when I mention that Miles Morales is, in my opinion, equally autistic coded, people are a little bit confused. So I've got some examples of some things that Miles Morales does in his movies that are very, very autistic coded, in my opinion. He stims. He stims very much so, specifically to self-regulate. I think that we can actually see this in Spider-Verse a little bit more clearly than we can see it in other movies that are just about Peter Parker. Like, because in the first movie, he has to stim to regulate himself, and that's like an actual plot point. He has a lot of trouble getting his hands to unstick from the walls, the ceilings. Everyone tells him he needs to relax before he can unstick, and he can't figure out how to do it until finally, when he's in a high stress situation, and Peter B asks him what he does to relax, and he starts dancing and singing his favorite song while he's on the ceiling. And then he unsticks from the wall. That is stimming to self-regulate. That is the definition of stimming to self-regulate, even if it's not what people classically see as like a stim, as what people would look like and be like, yes, that's stimming. Dancing and singing very much can be a stim.
Yep.
And also, he canonically has anxiety.
Which is higher in autistic
Which is
people.
higher in autistic people. He's awkward in social situations, as is pretty much every other spider person. I think that there are autistic traits that are just prevalent among every spider person that are kind of really some of the only common factors among all of the spider people. Like, what makes a spider person? It's the autism, apparently. Because all of the things that go across all of them are just autistic traits, aside from backstory stuff. Like, all of the actual personality stuff that
Canon events.
all of them. The canon event is autism.
The canon event is autism.
Also, in the first movie, you can see him walking down the street. He knows a lot of people and has a lot of surface level interactions with many of them, and yet he only has one friend that isn't a spider person. It implies that he can make friends easily, but struggles with maintaining the friendship and achieving a deeper level of connection with people, which would make quite a bit of sense if he's masking. And yeah, and he's a burnt out gifted kid. Oh, and there's a scene. So there's a scene in the first movie that also kind of almost directly parallels a scene in Spider-Man Homecoming that is very autistic for both of them. And it is where there is, in Spider-Man Homecoming, it's Peter getting quite a bit of social coaching from Aunt May right before the homecoming dance. Which is something that most 15-year-old neurotypical children would not accept that much social coaching from a parental figure. And Miles does the exact same thing, really, with his uncle in in the first Spider-Verse movie. Not a very neurotypical thing to do.
No, at that age, you're generally embarrassed by your parents.
Yeah. And I mean, for Miles, it is his uncle who isn't quite a parental figure to him, but still, you know, an adult role model in his life. I think it still applies.
Yeah.
Who is your favorite version of Spider-Man? That's a complicated question. So I would have to say the one that I am most emotionally attached to would be Tom Holland's Spider-Man in the MCU, just because that is the first one I watched. That is kind of who I think of when I think of Peter Parker. In terms of live action, like who I think played Spider-Man best, I would say I like Andrew Garfield's portrayal of Spider-Man the best. I think it's iconic. I love Andrew Garfield, and I really like the way that he did it. But yeah, if we're talking about spider people that don't involve Peter Parker, I would say probably a three-way tie between Sun Spider, who is the canonically disabled spider person, Spider-Punk, also known as Hobie Brown, and Miles. all of which are autistic coded because they're spider people.
That does it for this week's episode of The Pulse. What are your thoughts on Autism in the Spider-Verse? Let us know what you think in the comments. And as always, if you have questions or ideas you'd like us to discuss, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, send an email to voa@pacificautismfamily.com. We look forward to more of your great questions. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next time.